Greek and Latin borrowings. Aegis, 1. Something that protects or defends, shield. 2. Sponsorship or guidance by an individual or organization. The conference was held under the aegis of the World Affairs Council, which provided almost all of the funding. The original aegis was a goatskin shield or breastplate, symbolizing majesty, that was worn by Zeus and his daughter Athena in Greek mythology. Athena's aegis bore the severed head of the monstrous Medusa. Aegis came to be used for any kind of invulnerable shield. But today we almost always use the word and the phrase under the aegis of, which means under the authority, sponsorship, or control of. Charisma, 1. An extraordinary gift for leadership that attracts popular support and enthusiasm. 2. A special ability to attract or charm, magnetism. Many later leaders have envied the charisma of Napoleon Bonaparte, who many of his followers genuinely believed to be immortal. Charisma is Greek for gift, but its traditional meaning comes from Christian belief, where it originally referred to an extraordinary power, the gift of healing, the gift of tongues, or the gift of prophecy, bestowed on an individual by the Holy Spirit. The first non-religious use of charisma didn't appear until the 20th century, when it was applied to that mysterious personal magnetism that a lucky few seem to possess, especially the magnetism with which a political leader can arouse great popular enthusiasm. When John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960, its use by journalists popularized the term in the mass media. Since then, actors, rock stars, athletes, generals, and entrepreneurs have all been said to possess charisma. Ego, 1. A sense of confidence and satisfaction in oneself, self-esteem. 2. An exaggerated sense of self-importance. His raging ego was what his fellow lawyers remembered about him, his tantrums, his vanity, his snobbery, and all the rest of it. Ego is the Latin word for I, so if a person seems to begin every sentence with I, it's sometimes a sign of a big ego. It was the psychologist Sigmund Freud, well, actually his original translator, who put ego into the popular vocabulary, but what he meant by the word is complex, so only other psychologists really use it in the Freudian sense. The rest of us generally use ego simply to mean one's sense of self-worth, whether exaggerated or not. When used in the exaggerated sense, ego is almost the same thing as conceit. Meeting a superstar athlete without a trace of this kind of ego would be a most refreshing experience. But having a reasonable sense of your own worth is no sin. Life's little everyday victories are good, in fact, necessary, for a healthy ego. Ethos, the features, attitudes, moral code, or basic beliefs that define a person, a group, or an institution. The company's ethos has always been an interesting blend of greed and generosity. Ethos means custom or character in Greek. As originally used by Aristotle, it referred to a man's character or personality, especially in its balance between passion and caution. Today, ethos is used to refer to the practices or values that distinguish one person, organization, or society from others. So we often hear of the ethos of rugged individualism and self-sufficiency on the American frontier in the 19th century, and a critic might complain about, for example, the ethos of violence in the inner cities or the ethos of permissiveness in the suburbs. Hubris, unreasonable or unjustified pride or self-confidence. 2 hours later, the team's boastful pre-game hubris bumped into the embarrassing reality of defeat. To the Greeks, hubris referred to extreme pride, especially pride and ambition so great that they offend the gods and lead to one's downfall. Hubris was a character flaw often seen in the heroes of classical Greek tragedy, including Oedipus and Achilles. The familiar old saying "pride goeth before a fall" is basically talking about hubris. ID, the part of a person's unconscious mind that relates to basic needs and desires. His own ID often scared him, especially when a sudden violent impulse would well up out of nowhere. In Latin, ID means simply it. Sigmund Freud, and his translator, brought the word into the modern vocabulary as the name of what Freud believed to be one of the 3 basic elements of the human personality, the other 2 being the ego, see ego, and the superego. According to Freud, the ID is the first of these to develop, and is the home of the body's basic instincts, particularly those involving sex and aggression. Since the ID lacks logic, reason, or even organization, it can contain conflicting impulses. Primitive in nature, it wants to be satisfied immediately. Although its workings are completely unconscious, Freud believed that its contents could be revealed in works of art, in slips of the tongue, Freudian slips, and in one's dreams. Libido. 1. Sexual drive. 2. In psychoanalytic theory, energy that is derived from primitive biological urges and is usually goal-oriented. She would sit at home trying not to think about where his unmanageable libido had led him this time. The Latin word libido, meaning desire, lust, was borrowed by Sigmund Freud as the name for a concept in his own theories. At first, he defined libido to mean the instinctual energy associated with the sex drive. Later, he broadened the word's meaning and began using it to mean the mental energy behind purposeful human activity of any kind. In other words, the libido, for which Freud also used the term eros, a Greek word meaning sexual love, came to be regarded as the life instinct, which included sex along with all the other impulses we rely on to keep us alive. But those of us who aren't psychologists use the word simply as a synonym for sex drive. Trauma. 1. A serious injury to the body. 2. An abnormal psychological state caused by mental or emotional stress or physical injury. 15 years later, their adopted Cambodian daughter was still having nightmares in which she relived the trauma of those terrible years. Trauma is the Greek word for wound. Although the Greeks used the term only for physical injuries, nowadays trauma is just as likely to refer to emotional wounds. We now know that a traumatic event can leave psychological symptoms long after any physical injuries have healed. The psychological reaction to emotional trauma now has an established name: post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It usually occurs after an extremely stressful event, such as wartime combat, a natural disaster, or sexual or physical abuse. Its symptoms include depression, anxiety, flashbacks, and recurring nightmares.